everyone. We want to welcome you to our the third of our Winter Landscape and Turfgrass webinar series. We are very excited and thrilled to have Rick Smith, the pruning guru, with us today. He's going to be talking about fine-tuning your pruning program. Rick is not only an expert professional, excellent at his craft, a great business person, but his presentations are always interesting and humorous. I want to thank everybody here who is a member of the Georgia Urban Ag Council. We appreciate your support as we work hard to advocate for our industry and to educate our industry. In particular, we want to thank all of our seed sponsors who help us with all of our efforts.
All right, so what I want to do is show you a couple things, because I do a lot of traveling as well, and I see things that in landscape homes, I'd see it in on my travels at cemeteries, but I just put these on here just because it was really cool. For an example, this is a Japanese maple, and if you see my footprints down at the bottom of the tree, you can kind of see the base of it. And this was actually here in Buckhead. This is in the cemetery that in Vicksburg, Mississippi, that my wife pointed this sign out, and I said, well, dang, if they got a sign that says ginkgo, they must have one. So I saw this, and just like everybody else is right now going, oh my gosh, it's crazy. So this cemetery was established in 1866. So you kind of have an idea how old that ginkgo is. And it's a female. This is a red eastern cedar that was in the same cemetery. Now this is probably going to blow a lot of your mind here. So you see the English ivy that is right here. Well, this here is also an English ivy that was planted in 1925. This is a tree, and I had never seen anything like this. Look at the girth of that. It's amazing. This is a dwarf nandina here. I always ask everybody, how many do you think there is? And there's actually, this is one. This was planted 50 years ago. So my point of showing you these pictures, and especially this one right here, when we do pruning, we always want to make sure that, especially when we're doing it for customers, we want to make sure that the customer comes home to tranquility. And there's nothing more nothing more exciting when a homeowner comes home and then after you've done this hard work and they call you up and say, this is incredible, this is exactly what I'm looking for. So I'm hoping that by going through and showing you how this how pruning is perceived, and especially when you do it the right way, it'll really help you out. This is a book right here that I always put in my PowerPoint. It's something that I highly recommend you buying for your company. It's nothing about reading, it's more pictures, and it shows you the zones, it shows you how to make the cuts, and it's pretty dang good. What's the number one rule before you put a plant in the ground? Do your research. Make sure you find out how large the plant gets, how fast does it grow, does it take sun or shade. Proper pruning methods help your plants live longer, look healthier, and thrive. So why do we prune? We prune for symmetry, as a result of balance. For an example, this is Gibbs' garden. And I have to confess that out of all this time, Gibbs' garden's been around. This winter was the first time I'd ever been there. And I was really amazed. But you can see how everything in the background has been pruned. Everything is not the same size. It's a balance. Health of the plant, removing dead branches. So for an example, a lot of people think that this dead branch right here, that the dead just stops right there where you see it. But when you actually remove that nub, you can see that the dead or the decay continues into the trunk of the plant. Same thing here. When you come across something like this, make sure that you remove it, because it's just going to get worse. And disease branches or foliage. The problem with camellias and when you're shearing plants is, or using mechanical or hand shears, when you have this like a camellia and you get a leaf gall, you spread the spores along the top of the plant, and it just stays on your pruners, and it ends up spreading, and it gets worse and worse. Rosette virus. I'm sure everybody's come across this quite a few times, and there's no cure for this. Just like there's no cure for the leaf gall on the sasanquas. So the best thing is, especially with the sasanquas, is to prune it out without touching the gall. Unfortunately, with rosette virus, there's not a cure, and you can try to prune it out if you sanitize your pruners, if there's only one or maybe two of these spikes here, but generally you have to remove the plant and any roses that's around it. Branches with insects. This is an example of just pruning this out instead of having to get your backpack and spraying the whole plant. This is a small group of aphids that attack this branch, so you can prune it out. Don't throw it on the ground, because they're just going to end up, finding their way back up the plant. Containment. Keeping a tree or shrub in bounds of its planted area. For an example, we have a customer here that landscape architect put this deodora cedar here, and you can see on the right hand side where it's growing onto the walkway and going over the wall here. So when they're small like this is a great opportunity where you can keep it contained, doing the proper pruning, feather pruning, and I'll explain that later. So you can see there's a nice balance there. Production. We prune to produce blooms and fruit on camellias, rhododendrons if needed. I took this picture here because I was amazed how big this rhododendron bloom is compared to my hand. And fruit. So you can see that on bananas, that right here has a flower. All right. And you see how small these bananas are here. And then you come over here and you see how large these bananas are here. But the thing is this has no bloom because it was cut off. So all the energy that is going to this flower right here is taking away energy from the smaller fruit here. But when you cut the bloom off, look at the size of the bananas. So thinking about how how plants respond is really a key to pruning as well. All right, do the job right, be safe, never get in a hurry, use the right tool for the job. Always know where your fingers are. Do not take shortcuts. For an example, I always put this, I know it's an old slide, but it's entertaining. I don't even know how they would even do this. Sometimes when you're in a hurry, you're not thinking, really need to be safety conscientious. When you're using a chainsaw, make sure you have all your safety equipment, hearing, eyeglasses, gloves. So I want to go over some tools real quick that I recommend. These are Felco pruners. They'll last you a lifetime if you take care of them. But the good thing is, when it comes to pruners, is making sure that they are bypassed versus the anvil pruners. The anvil pruners is where they actually cut and the blade hits a solid surface. I'm not a big fan of these because they get dull quick, they're hard to sharpen, and then when you prune with a dull pair of anvil pruners, they smash the stem instead of properly cutting it like a bypass does. The bypass comes in the loppers as well, in the anvils, loppers. The folding saw is your best friend as long as you are safe with it, because let me tell you something. I've seen people almost cut their finger off with these, and not because they weren't paying attention or wearing gloves. This is a Felco, but Corona makes one just like it, and the Corona is a lot cheaper, and it works just as good. This is a pair of Fiskars pole pruners. These are the short versions, and I recommend them because they're very light, they're manageable, and they have the large ones as well. The problem that I see with these is not how they operate, but the user tends to try to cut something larger than it can, and they will break on you if you continuously do that. And they are bypassed as well. This is a cool tool right here that I love introducing. It's called a Gator Lopper, and it's a battery operated. It's Black & Decker, and you can see the chain right here, and it's really safe. You got a trigger here and you got a trigger here. This chainsaw right here part will not operate unless you use both triggers at the exact same time. This will cut a 4-inch branch. The battery lasts quite a while, so it's a really nice tool when you're doing a lot of rejuvenation on plants. Rejuvenation is where you're reducing the size of the plant by half or 2/3. So this is a really good thing to use. All right, and this is another one. I just bought my guys a bunch of these. This is a Zawsaw Black & Decker as well, and this thing weighs about 2 pounds. But when you're wanting to prune crepe myrtles or prune dead branches off of trees, this is a really quick and easy tool, and it's Black & Decker as well. And the batteries are same batteries can be used with each of these tools. And this is a pole saw that is Black & Decker as well, that's extendable. And of course, this is for the extreme. The fertilizer that I use, that I've been using for years, is Lesco Triple 14, and I like this product because it's got a lot of micronutrients in it, which is in what the yellow square is in. It's especially when you end up doing some rejuvenation on plants. It's a really good time. When they in February or March, it's always a good time to put your fertilizer out, and then on blooming plants. This is a growth regulator called Atramac. It's a liquid. It's about $350 to $400 a gallon. You only use about 2 ounces per gallon. And this is a foliar growth regulator, foliar systemic. So this is where you actually spray it on the foliage, and you really need to get the chemical out before the temperature is above 80 degrees. This is used on English ivy, Elaeagnus. So if you're going to be putting growth regulator out, now you want to start, this time of the year, you want to start getting your English ivy and your plants into good shape, because the only time you can use this is when the new growth has started to come out. This Cutlass, this is a granule that you actually put at the base of the plant, and it's a root systemic, and which is also a growth regulator, and this works just as good. Things that we have to look out for as landscapers when we're pruning is big hornet's nest and yellow jackets. I don't know if anybody's ever been hit by a saddleback caterpillar, but that's what this is. And I got stung by this little guy right here, and he didn't live long enough to survive the day, but they hurt. I don't know if anybody's seen these new spiders. These are the gyro spiders, and their web is almost as thick as a fishing line, believe it or not. I don't think they'll hurt you, but they're just a nuisance. Snakes, things we have to look out for: poison ivy, poison oak, sumac, and pets. All right, shearing versus hand pruning. Shearing is where you're using a mechanical or hand shears like this to prune your shrub into a tight ball. So when you're shearing a plant, you're making a cut right here, and you're creating 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, or 7 new growth. And then when you come back later and you prune these, you're going to quadruple the amount of foliage. So what happens is the top of the plant gets so thick that air or light can't get into the center of the plant, and now you just end up having a dome, and that is not healthy for a plant at all. For an example, so this is a ligustrum right here that's been sheared for years, and you can see that there's no foliage in the center of this plant. So we came in and we did a rejuvenation on this by 2/3. So you can see from the top down. And basically what we're doing is we're rebuilding this frame right here, so that way it'll produce new foliage. The time frame for winter pruning or rejuvenation pruning is usually January, February, March, April, sometimes May. It really depends on the weather here in Atlanta or in Georgia, but you always keep that in mind. And it also depends on the plant itself as well. So it's, but this is a really good way of bringing a plant back that has been improperly pruned. So with that said, once we rejuvenated this, we came back a couple years later and we started thinning it out because the landscapers still were shearing it, as you can see right here. So we just came through, as you can see through here, we were thinning the plant out, making some interior cuts. And I'll get into that here in a second. Nandinas, guys, there is no reason on this God's green earth that anybody needs to shear a Nandina. I don't care where it's planted, where it's at, there's no reason for it. You can easily reduce the size of these to shape them up just by cutting a few long canes out of it. Nandina is basically it grows like bamboo, and when you have a long stalk that comes up, wherever you prune the stalk, let's say for example, let me erase this so it doesn't get too cluttered. All right, so let's say that you have a plant that a Nandina that's starting to get leggy. So if you prune, down, let's say burn it. Let's say you prune one stalk right here. Well, right here is where foliage is going to come out and it's going to fill in. Then you make another cut, taking out a taller shoot, and you can prune it here, and then one here. You're staggering the cut. So when the foliage comes out, it'll start filling in the base. Don't do what a lot of homeowners tell me they do, and they cut the long stalk down to the ground. You're eliminating one problem and creating a worse, because you cut it down to the ground like this, and it's going to these shoots right here, and it's just going to end up spreading. And so if you take out each tall shoot here one at a time and cut them where you want to, the Nandina will actually go low enough and still look good where you want it. So Always keep that in mind. It's not a hard issue, but if you do it right, and you can do that any time of the year. All right, shearing. This is a anise. You can see where um, it's been sheared so much that you can see this interior growth. Well, not interior growth. This all the stems right here. It's just gotten so thick, and this is not healthy for a plant at all. It can create diseases, um, and a lot of stems will end up not producing foliage because it is so thick, and it'll start dying at the top. Here with anise, a lot of times when it's been sheared, you can come in and um, thin it out to be able to get it back into a natural shape. So that way, when it does produce new growth, it comes back out and it looks very good. So when you're shearing a plant and you want it tight, that's called formal pruning. For example, a lot of people like their boxwoods sheared like the Koreans, and they want it into an English style kind of garden, and that's called a formal pruning. Whenever you're pruning like this, taking out thick knots from where a plant's been sheared and getting it to look like this, this is called informal pruning. And that's what a lot of people like. They like the informal pruning. They don't like the the green meatballs and the squares and the Mickey Mouses. They want their plants to be healthy. And really, honestly, pruning like this is you're protecting your customer's investment for the long run. Plants you can shear, though, you can shear your Yopon hollies into a formal shape, Hillary hollies, and Carissa hollies. So when they do get large, you can actually rejuvenate these, and you'll be fine. So let's get into the proper pruning. And proper pruning is where you're going into the plant, and you're actually pruning to a lateral. So this is the main branch right here. This here is called a lateral, and you can see where my pruners is right here. They're cutting to the lateral right there, and that's something you always want to get used to doing, because you're redirecting growth. And when you're redirecting growth, you can control how a plant is growing. You can prune it to where it's not growing toward a wall. You can prune it to where it's not growing over a sidewalk. So redirecting growth is really good. You're thinning the plant out as well, and you're allowing air and light into the plant. And that's really the key to pruning into a formal shape. This is another branch that I pruned. You can see the lateral. Oops, darn it. You can see the lateral right here. All right, my pruners is here. The picture's kind of deceiving. All right, so basically all I'm doing is I'm redirecting growth right here. And the reason why I'm making a small cut, because if I end up making a large cut, I'll end up making a hole in the plant. So that's why I just, doing a minor little pruning here. And you're just doing it for shape. A lot of times when you have a branch that, or a sucker, for an example, that's growing, where a hole has been created in a plant, you can prune to a bud, and the terminal bud, which is right here, will produce a branch going out in that direction. And so that will help out as well. And one thing you don't want to do, though, you see the angle that I have on the branch, is that you're pruning on an angle, so that way the water will, especially on larger branches, will run off the branch and won't create a decay. But when you do prune it in an angle, don't prune it in this direction. So make the make the top of the branch, you see where, for example, here when you cut it, the angle is away from the bud, so the water can run away from the bud itself. But when you prune it here, the water runs toward the bud, and then you end up having a little nub as well from the backside of the stem. All right, for an example, this is where you prune into a bud to encourage new growth or a new lateral. All right, so one thing about pruning shrubs is you have to have a visual, one of how the shrub is supposed to look, how it's going to look when you get done pruning. And this is one thing that I tell my guys is that, when they first started or start working, is that it takes about a year to a year and a half to really understand how plants overall respond to proper pruning. So for example, this is a Japanese plum yew, a Cyphalotaxis, and you can see that I have pruned it down to the point to where it's almost bare at the top, and so this is the top of the Cyphalotaxis right here. So I'm taking a good foot off. So this is the time of the year that if you're wanting to not rejuvenate the plant, but you want to bring it down enough to where you can get it back in a good shape. And with Cyphalotaxis, you can do this any time of the year. But you want to bring it down to the bottom of the, let me start over, sorry. You bring it down to the point to where it's almost bare at the top. So that way you're leaving a lot of foliage, so you still have good, good greenery at the top. So you can see where I've gone along the edge right here, pruning it. So you can kind of see division. So when you're pruning and you've done this a while and you come up to a Cyphalotaxis, you know what needs to be done. And this is something that you just have to continuously keep doing so you understand how the plant responds. And this is what you have to teach your new guys, that once you show them how to prune, this is what the plant's supposed to look like. And this is what it looks like when you let the plant go. And let them know that it's okay if you make a mistake. Just make sure you make the mistake behind the plant, not in front of the plant. This is what I always teach my guys: start in the back, so if you do make a mistake, no one can see it. When you're pruning, look for, no matter what plant it is, look for insects. This is scale that's on the Cyphalotaxis, and scale is really bad when it on Cyphalotaxis and other plants, and that's what causes the black sooty mildew in the center. So always let somebody know. Having a vision. This is an example right here of this juniper right here. Customer wanted this back into a pom-pom juniper. So when you're looking at this, you gotta imagine how this plant's going to look when you get done pruning it. You can, but with junipers or any conifers, you have to know that if you cut below the past the green and it's just brown, and you prune into that brown, that will never come back out. So you have to be very gentle when it comes to topiary like this. So this is the vision that I had when we were pruning this, and this is how it actually came out. Teaching you guys pruning habits. A lot of times I've seen where crews that get on the property, sometimes one guy will prune in the backyard, one guy will prune somewhere else. That's not efficient. Being efficient when it comes to a large property like this is where you train your guys to prune together. Don't prune too close to each other because you don't want anybody accidentally cutting their finger. Having that vision of how that plant's supposed to look. So it's always good to, whenever you have a supervisor and he has that image of how that plant needs to look, is to go ahead and prune the spot first like this, and then it kind of gives the guys an idea of what they should be expecting or what you are expecting. So you can kind of see how this flow is carrying on. And when you prune together like this, not only are you efficient, but you're getting the job done. And you notice the tarps that are below the azaleas here, that's being efficient as well. You're just throwing your clippings on the tarp and you're hauling everything off instead of having to come back, clean it up. You're just wasting time. So you can see that anytime we're pruning anything, we're always in a group. All right, so back to the shearing part of it. This is where these Foster hollies right here were sheared. And you can kind of see what I was talking about earlier. When you shear a plant so much that a lot of times it chokes out and kills a branch, and that's the reason why there's a dead spot here. And you can also tell here that there's no foliage in the center of the plant. Anybody knows that a Foster holly, if you prune it naturally, it's going to have stems, foliage all in it instead of looking like a bullet. All right. So here is a Emily Bruner here that we actually rejuvenated. And if you're going to do this kind of pruning to a Nellie R. Stevens or any sort of tree form holly like that, now is the time to do it. Yeah, is it going to be ugly? Do you need to let your customer know that it's going to be ugly? Absolutely. So when you're doing your estimate and you know what you're envisioning, but that customer does not. So you have to tell them, when I get done, it's going to look like a bomb headed and it's going to be nothing but sticks. But if you explain to them that after I do this, it's only going to take a couple, 2 or 3 months for it to come back out. Put a little humor in it too. For an example, when I'll tell them that when I'm going to rejuvenate a holly like this, a holly you can throw in the middle of 285, let 100 cars run over it, put it back in the ground, and it will come back out no problem. So you can see this is the same plant where it was growing in front of the window, it's growing into the sidewalk, and how thick it was. So it's just was not a healthy plant. Taking out any of the long sucker growth, and this is the end result. So we did this in February, and in middle of March, you can see these black buds that are starting to form. And then in April, this is the same plant. So it looks really good, and the customer's happy. So when you are, I will give you a little caution that when you have 3 or 4 Nellie R. Stevens growing together as a group or a wall, this may not be the best type of pruning to reduce the size. Is because when you look inside of the grouping of Nellie R. Stevens, for an example, where they actually have been touching each other for years, the branching on the inside will probably die off or whatever, but there's not going to be any branches where the two connect. So when you envision that grouping rejuvenated, you're going to have a one-sided or a two-sided plant that has foliage on one side and not on the other because there's no branching. So look at the frame. Always look inside the frame first, or look inside the plant and see, all right, if I rejuvenate this plant, is this going to have enough branches when the new foliage comes out? Is it going to look good? All right, rejuvenating your ponds. This is the time of year to do this as well. So you can see that this is just some overgrown yolk ponds. We end up bringing them down by 2/3. And you can be relentless on these things. I mean, they're just, they'll grow in full sun, they'll grow in medium sun, but do not do this if it's in full sun, in full shade, because a lot of times whenever you go to someone's home and they have yolk ponds in the shade, well, I'm sure at one time that years ago when they landscaped that those yopons were getting plenty of sun, but now they're not. So if you rejuvenate those in the deep shade like that, you probably are not going to have a good response to foliage as this right here looks. So this is in full sun, as you can see, and it only took about 2 months for this to come back out. So just be mindful of your situation whenever you're pruning. That is the key. Is it full sun? Is it shade? You have to determine how you're going to prune that plant based off the situation that you're in.
Hey, Rick.
Yes.
We have a question.
Yeah.
At what point do you decide a holly needs to be rejuvenated?
When
What do you base it on?
I base it off of the scale of the landscaping itself. So if you have smaller shrubs and you have a holly, like for an example, a yopon holly is just grown way too large, and it just disturbs the whole scale of what the landscape architect was planning. In order to get that back to scale, or either in some cases it's just too large for the homeowner to prune themselves if they ever want to. But it's really situational, should I say. Does the customer want like this? Is it going to look better when I do it? Is it going to bring all the plants back into scale when I do this? I hope I answered the question. All right, Japanese maples. I love this topic. This is definitely not a way you're supposed to prune a Japanese maple. This is a weeping dissectum that somebody sheared. Made me sick to my stomach when I saw it. Same thing with this. Looks like a little toadstool. The story behind this one right here is that it looked beautiful, and the customer said, "Oh, I got my 16-year-old son. I told him to go out there and prune it and make it look good." Well, apparently his vision of pruning and her looking good and her vision was not the same, and she was livid and called me and asked me if there was anything that I could do. And the obvious answer is no. I cannot produce a miracle on this one. Same thing here. Same garden. This is an upright Japanese maple that they got their shears and sheared the top, made it look like a dome. And anybody knows anything about Japanese maples, you shear a Japanese maple like this and you're going to have spikes all summer long. That should going to cost you more time on pruning than it is that it's worth it. So if you just prune these to where they're informal, natural, and let it do what it's supposed to do, you can keep it contained a whole lot easier. This time of the year with Japanese maples, you can see that there's a lot of dead in this weeping dissectum, and it's not dead because the plant's declining. It's just, when you have a large weeping dissectum and it created a lot of foliage during the summer, you're going to have a lot of dead in the middle of it, and you just want to go in there and remove a lot of that dead, and so that way it'll look a whole lot better. So if you're looking at this right here, just doesn't look good. You got a lot of gray in it, and it's not good to leave those dead branches in there over time. So when you're walking someone's garden and you see this, you really need to suggest you going in and taking out the dead branches. So here is a weeping dissectum that I had the pleasure of pruning about 2 to 3 years ago, and you can see how large this thing is. That's my truck to the right, and this thing was planted in 1960, and I was shocked. I've never pruned one this big. So you can see how big the branching is on the inside. And whenever you're pruning a Japanese maple, a lot of people think that you have to go on the outside and prune it. It's actually the opposite. So let me go back a little bit here. So when you're pruning a Japanese maple like this, you always want to get on your back and go into the center and look up and start pruning, dead out and any branches that does not need to be there in order to thin it out. I'll show you that here in a second. An example of thinning it out, if you look at the foliage and how thick it is, you can barely see my truck right here. All right, but when you go in and thin it out, just taking out small branches from the inside, not from the outside, and lightly taking 1, 2, 3 out, you can see that you lit the sky, you lit an object of whatever that's on the outside. Let that be your guide, so you can see the difference, that how thick that is and how thin that is. That's about where you want it. When you go through and you're pruning, make sure you're taking out the dead nubs as well, because if you don't, as I showed you earlier, all it does is just the decay continues into the cambium as well. So this is after I end up pruning the inside of it. This tree right here took me 4 hours to prune, and I enjoyed every minute of it. This is me actually in the Japanese maple at the top of it, looking down at my ladder. So this is before and this is after. Looks good, doesn't it? So this is the way Japanese maples should look. You should be able to see the silhouette of the branching, so that way it still looks ornamental. And apparently the customer sheared their dandiness there at the mailbox. Just noticed.
Rick,
all right. Yes.
Can you prune Japanese maples of that size in the summer?
No, I do not recommend it. I don't recommend pruning Japanese maples in the heat of the summer, or either when it's producing new growth. The best time to prune Japanese maple, in my opinion, is, for example, right now when the leaves are off. You can see the frame, and when you're looking at the buds, remember that each branch or branches is going to create foliage. So you can visually imagine when the foliage comes out how thick it's going to grow. So if you can go through there and take out, actually, let me go back and I'll show you. So you can see how thick this Japanese maple is here, and now it's thinned out. So right now, when you see a Japanese maple on the customer's or even your house, and it looks like this is a time to go in and start thinning it out. So when you get done, this is what it should look like. And then if you're pruning it in this, after the foliage has come out and the foliage has hardened off, that's usually about a month after that is when I start pruning these again. And again, you'd have to get underneath it and notice how thick it is and go in there and thin it out. Japanese maples are fun to prune, but making a mistake on these can be very detrimental. So be very careful on who you have pruning these, and again, envision what you are expecting this tree to look like. And if you envision what this tree is supposed to look like when you get done, you do not have to come out from the middle of the tree and go out and look at it from the outside, because you can envision it. You can prune that whole tree right there from the inside, never coming out, and then coming back out when you're done. And this is what you know that's what you're going to get. And it just takes time and experience. 5 plants that need special pruning: hydrangeas, boxwoods, crepe myrtles, azaleas, and roses. The hydrangeas, this is the time of the year you really really need to know your hydrangeas before you just go in and start pruning them. You have to know whether they bloom off of uh, old wood or new wood. So to the left are Nico Blue hydrangeas, the macrophyllus. They bloom off of old wood. So if you prune those down to the ground this time of the year, you're not going to get any blooms next year. On the right is or are summer, endless summer hydrangeas. They bloom off of old and new wood. The only thing is when they don't have any foliage, well, actually, when they don't have any blooms on them, and you have an endless summer and a Nico Blue right next to each other, there's no way you're going to be able to tell which is which. So if you, especially this time of year, if you do not know 100% that that's an endless summer, you need to assume that it's a Nico Blue and prune it accordingly. And pruning it accordingly is only taking, a small amount out at a time to reduce the size. And that's, like sometimes you'll end up having a long stalk come out and distort the shape of it. You can prune that long spike out into the center of the plant. Are you going to lose the blooms on that one stalk? Yes, you are, but you're going to have so many blooms around it, it's not going to make any difference. All right, and then all the way to the very end up against the house, those are Incrediballs, and they bloom off of new wood, and you can prune those 8 to 10 inches from the ground. So this time of the year, remove the leaves. This is a pretty common thing that I see. I always inform the customer that the landscapers really, the maintenance crews, they really need to take this foliage out and leave it out, because if you don't, it just holds water and it can start decaying the branches. It can start creating a secondary root system. So get your hand in there and just, take it out and keep it out clean. When you do come across the dead branches like this, go ahead and prune them out. One thing you want to be cautious about is when this plant right here, for example, doesn't have any foliage, and you're looking down at the top of it, you can look at the end of the branch. You go, oh wow, that branch is dead. I need to go ahead and prune it out. And the biggest mistake that people make is they'll immediately go all the way down to the bottom and cut it out. And so if you can visualize that this plant right here, if it didn't have any foliage, and if you were just looking right here and you went and cut it all the way down, you would end up cutting out this branch right here and not even thinking. So make sure that when you look at the dead, that you follow it from the top going down like this, and look for branches that are darting off like this, and that has nice healthy buds on it. If it doesn't have nice healthy buds, usually and the whole branch is dead, you can tell there's a discoloration to the branch. And you can see how that branch right there that I'm cutting out is the bark is a little darker. A lot of times the bark will be wrinkled compared to a live stem. This is now these are endless summers here, and this is where you want to go in, whether it's an endless summer or a Nico Blue or whatever. You want to go in and get all the dead wood out of it. So you can see at the top there, this is before it was pruned, and then down at the bottom here, where all the dead is taken out. It's a healthier, pleasant looking plant to look at, and it'll save a headache in the long run. All right, the PG or tardive, this time of the year, they bloom off of new wood, so you can prune those down to about 6 to 12 inches to the ground if you need to. But if you have limelight hydrangeas like this, you want to keep them at a good size. If the plant, these hydrangeas, you can prune them really hard, but be careful about taking them down really, really low, because if you get in some hydrangeas that have some really thick trunks that's really old, don't cut really don't cut anything any larger than an inch and up, because if you do, you will set decay in because the wood is so soft. So try to bring it down as far as you can without getting into the old wood, and that really determines how old the plant is. So for example, these limelight hydrangeas are not very old, so I'm able to take them down pretty far, because they were, before we pruned these, they were literally about 4 foot taller than what they are now. So we end up bringing them down about 2/3. This is the same plant, same area, just a different view. And this is afterwards. And you can see how tall they are. So, really think about when you're pruning these, know that these things are going to put on 4 to 5 foot worth of growth. So the lower you can bring them, that'd be great. Always be cautious though. And sometimes you just can't help it when they get this big. And, there's nothing you can really do about it. Oak leaf hydrangeas, they bloom off of old wood, same thing, get the pine straw out. You want to prune, remember the nandinas I was discussing earlier about staggering your cuts? When oak leaf hydrangeas, they bloom off of old wood, so if you go down really low, or if you rejuvenate these, again, you're not going to get any blooms. But you can go down and you can go through and selectively remove any tall branches that's distorting the shape and prune them down into the center of the plant, like where these lines are, and it will produce new laterals in this area. Will you not get a bloom on that branch? That's you won't, but everything else you will have nice blooms. Boxwoods, I cannot stand boxwoods for this reason right here. I hope that every one of you are very, very familiar with boxwood blight. If you are not, you need to study up on it. So one thing that you can look at when you come across a plant like this, the first thing you need to do, and this is a mistake I see a lot. When you walk up to a plant like this and you see that, don't put your fingers on it. Don't, grab the plant and move it to the side. Don't even touch the plant with your fingers. All right. And when you're walking with your customer and they go, "Oh, well, I don't understand how, why this is dying." If you see them starting to reach down and touch it, you stop them, because you know that if you know anything about boxwood blight, it has spores, and it's very easily spread by touching it, another branch on the live part of the boxwood. So when you're looking at a stem, you see those black lesions that's on the branch. When you see those, you can pretty much 99% of the time know that it's boxwood blight. All right. At that stage, when you see this, they have to remove the plant. So these boxwoods right here was at one of my customers' house about 10 years ago. We're still maintaining them, but we had to go in and selectively remove these very carefully. And she had about 40 of these boxwoods, and a lot of them were really large. And we had to remove all of them because every one of them ended up getting boxwood blight, and we replaced them with upright yew. You cannot dig these up and put new boxwoods in this place. It's just not going to happen. You can, but you're just going to end up getting boxwood blight again. Here's an example right here that 3 or 4 months ago, these things look great. Out of the blue, these things just started showing signs, and you never know why. We've been maintaining this property for a long time, and we always sanitize our pruners with Lysol or either alcohol. I wanted to show you, this is a customer where we used to prune it all the time, and he decided to let their landscape company prune it one year, and they came in and used gas shears on it and sheared it. And They could have gotten the boxwood blight on someone else's yard, came over here and pruned these and ended up spreading it. So when we are when we step foot on the property, the first thing we do is use our spray bottle and sanitize our pruners. And I really highly recommend everybody do that. Boxwoods, a lot of times homeowners want these in a very formal shape, or either look natural or semi-formal. This is a situation where they're semi informal, and this works where you just go in and you make deep cuts and you're just starting to lower the plant, and it looks really good. You can see where the guys are, where they're pruning now, versus the plants on the behind them where we've already pruned. It looks really nice. So if you spend time, and that's one thing that is an issue, is when people come in, they shear a plant that, oh yeah, well it's really it doesn't take long to get shears and just shear the plant. Well, the problem is that not only do you, when you shear it, you got all those clippings to clean up, and then about 3 or 4 weeks later, you're going to have new shoots, because wherever you make a cut, that's where it's going to produce new growth. When you're hand pruning like this, you're making deeper cuts and you're opening up the plant, and it really does not take as much time as you think, and you don't have to come back to prune that plant again probably about 3 to 4 months later. So here are some Korean boxwoods that we pruned off of the away from the stone curbing there. So I'm just giving you an example of, you can prune plants without shearing them and still get them to look good, and it doesn't really take that long. We won't have to prune these again in another 4 or 5 months. But you put a pair of gas shears, these right here, I guarantee you, especially in the middle of summer, you'll be pruning them every 2 or 3 weeks, and it's not healthy for the plant. However, let's step back to where it may sound like I'm contradicting myself and when I'm about to say this, but if you do have a garden that someone does want it sheared, they want it tight. If that's going to happen, if they insist that that's going to happen, you need to go in every other year or so and go in at the top of the plant and start making holes to allow air and light to get into the plant, so that way it will produce air and light and then produce new growth. So you just going to have to do that once in a while. For an example like this, I went to London, actually this is France, and I saw all the bamboo stakes there where they put string along it to where they can get all of the boxwoods the same height. So you can, going through the top of those and thin them out a little bit once in a while to allow air and light in them will keep them from, the sides starting to shade out or wither away from shearing so much. What I do when we want to try to get all the boxwoods the same height, we'll get sticks and we'll measure where we want the boxwoods at the height. We'll stick it, the stick in there, and then we'll cut the stick where we want the height. And then we'll cut multiple sticks and we'll give them to each one of the guys and say, all right, this is the height, stick the plant in there, prune around it. This way, when everybody uses that method, at the end of the day, when they step back, every boxwood will be the same height. And that's the goal, instead of having to, string, put string everywhere. Korean boxwoods, you can actually rejuvenate a Korean boxwood by 2/3. You cannot do American boxwood like this. If you do, it will take 2 or 3 years for it to come back out and look halfway decent again. But with this one here, these boxwoods, we rejuvenated them, and this was at the end, middle of February, March, in April. This is a customer that we took over. The landscaper was shearing these, and I talked the customer and letting us rejuvenate these. So we did this at the end of February, and end of April, this is what they look like. All right, you notice I didn't touch the large American boxwood. Crepe murder. This is a topic that drives me insane, but hopefully everybody's getting the message not to continue with this type of pruning. Like this right here, they might as well just went ahead and cut it down to the ground and let it sprout back up, and then they could have removed a few branches, trunks, and left 2 or 3 there to recreate another tree. This one here, you can see where these things must have been huge, but I can't imagine what they look like after they started putting out new growth. Something else you want to look out for, especially about March, is Ambrosian beetles. Especially when you prune a tree like this or like that, you're probably going to see this more often. These are Ambrosian beetles. They look like they have toothpicks coming out, and that's because the beetle bores into the trunk, and as they're boring in, they're pushing the sawdust out. That's what it looks like. And if you end up getting Ambrosian beetles in a tree, more than likely you're going to have to cut the tree down and remove that off-site. These are crepe myrtles here that we didn't lower the height, but all we did is come in and thin them out. And by thinning them out, you get rid of all these twiggies, this little twigs in there, so it looks like this. Remove any dead nubs. Make a good flush cut. And so this is while we're in here pruning these, thin them out. So this is before, this is after. It looks a lot better. You've taken out crossing branches, getting rid of all the little sticks. This is where we come in. We do lower the height of these. We're coming in, bringing it down probably about 6 or 7 feet. And this is how this should look when you get done. Nice and clean. Make sure that you're taking out crossing branches when you're pruning crepe myrtles. These are the same crepe myrtles that I first showed you. And because if you don't, you can see that the branches will start rubbing and creating a callus, or even start fusing together. So go ahead and prune it out. You can see where now the callus there will now be able to heal up. Azaleas. Azaleas, you want to prune them until July the 4th before they start setting buds. So that way, after they bloom the 4th of July, that's when you can prune them. Usually the G.G. Gerbings or George Tabor is a great example of which ones that bloom only once a year. The Encore azaleas, which bloom 2 or 3 times a year, if you need to prune them, you can prune them right after they bloom, up to about a month or so. And I did say you can't, don't prune them after the 4th of July or so, but that's really a misconception. Overall, yes, you can prune them, but mildly. So the problem with where that misconception came from is because everybody at the time would shear their azaleas after the 4th of July, and they'd end up cutting all the blooms off, and it would not bloom. So you can see here, when you have a mass of azaleas and you got 1 or 2 shoots up there at the top, you can prune those down and out. You're going to have a miss of bloom right there, just in that one little spot, but you're not going to be able to tell. So I wouldn't worry too much about touching them up, any time of year like this. This is what azaleas should look like when they've been properly pruned, properly fertilized. So if you have overgrown azaleas, when's the best time to rejuvenate them. And you want to do it before they bloom, end of February, beginning of March. And, I know some of you are probably thinking that, well, if you do that, you're going to lose all the blooms. Well, yes, and that's kind of the point. However, if you're going to do this, you make sure you tell your customer that that we need to do this. It's for the health of the plant, but you're going to lose bloom. And what I tell the customers to educate them on this is I always say that if you rejuvenate with azaleas, for example, whenever they produce a bud, it takes a lot of energy out of that root system to produce a bud. When that same azalea produces a bloom, it takes even more energy out of the root system. And then if you rejuvenate it after it blooms, now you're asking that plant to produce foliage after it just ran a marathon. But if you rejuvenate them in February or March, you got all that energy stored in that root system, and that will be used to new foliage. And yes, you'll lose your blooms, but the plant will respond a lot better and be even healthier. Roses, in general, you can even start pruning those now into the early spring. Knockout roses, you can bring those down by, well, actually, there's a good question right here. Do you have to be careful with pruning these? The answer is no. You can prune these things almost as hard as you want to. So this knockout rose here, we brought it down by 2/3. Make sure that you angle your cuts. At the top of the cut, there's a bud that is pointing toward the outside of the plant. Because remember, any bud that you prune at, that's going to be the dominant bud, and that's going to be the lateral, and it's going to shoot the laterals toward the outside of the plant, not to the inside, and clean all the dead out of it. Hybrid teas, you can bring them down. I always say 18, 24 inches because I never know the crowd that I'm talking to, but you go lower than that. Shrub roses, for an example, you want to go in and take out the real thick trunks, leaving the newer growth, and you can pull that out and it'll reduce the size of the plant. And you really don't want to, in some of the shrub roses, you can't do a hard rejuvenation on, but the ones that we pretty much have in Georgia, you can. Pruning disasters, stay away from this guy right here. I went to Korea a few years back, and I actually saw where they topped a ginkgo just so they could expose this sign here. These are graft repairs. It's been topped. You see that here in Atlanta or Georgia, even really everywhere all the time. And this is not healthy at all. So for example, if this was the top of the graft repair that was cut, that decay, grab my little hand here. So then right here, if you cut it at the top of if you cut the top of a tree out, this is what's going to happen. All this is going to start decaying. Then you're going to get one little sucker growth, and then they're going to get bigger. Then they're going to get bigger and bigger. And then you have these collars right here, and then you have a collar all the way around, and then they start growing and they fill in the decay. Well, the problem is decay is still there. It's always going to be there. So if anybody starts playing on the tree, like kids or stuff like that, these branches are going to break. So I personally do not agree with topping any tree, except for the crepe myrtle, only by 1/3 or so. Right. I don't know why anybody would ever plant a graft repair right in front of a building like this. That architect is probably no longer in the business. They eliminated one problem and created another problem here. They topped the tree. So what's going to happen is going to create a bunch of sucker growth up there. That sucker growth is going to get bigger and heavier, and that tree is going to end up splitting anyway. Then you got the lollipop graft repairs. cousinette, if anybody's old enough to remember cousinette. An oak that was topped, and a Japanese maple that was sheared into a Coke can. And then you got some creative people who can prune like this. No, I'm just kidding. This was off a Pink Floyd album that I took a picture of. So again, stay away from this guy here. Removing dead branches, make sure that you, or nubs, make sure that you cut the branch all the way to the collar. And the collar is the tissue that's at the base of the branch. That if you don't take that dead branch off right there, it's just going to end up eventually decaying and then snap off. Then you're going to end up having a hole like this. Make sure when you do cut a branch off that you cut the branch off at a kind of make sure your saw is parallel with the tree itself, and don't make it in an angle, because you can see where on the right hand side that they left a little bit of branch sticking out, so the collar is real narrow and thin. And then on the left side, the collar is nice and healthy. It's growing over the wound. So basically, when you don't prune a branch right, you pretty much slow down the healing process, and it will eventually harm the tree. So when you do prune a branch off, you use a 3-cut method. You see number 1 there, you go up about 6 to 8 inches. You make your first cut underneath it about a third to an inch. Go forward a little further than the picture they have here. I always tell the guys to go up about 3 or 4 inches and cut the branch completely off from that point, and then go to number 3 there and cut it to the edge of the tissue, which is the front of the collar. Don't cut any further into the collar, because if you do, you're making the wound larger and you're slowing down the healing process. So this is a good, nice cut here. It's in a good angle. The collar is nice and healthy, and then this is how it should look when it seals properly. This is a green giant thuja that it looks like it was improperly pruned, but the problem is in this situation is that the strap was not taken off in time before it started girdling. And this particular tree here, the day I took this picture, the next night a thunderstorm came in and broke it. And you can see that strap right there on the trunk, that it's probably an inch into the trunk itself. So anytime you're walking around, and don't assume that because the landscape's been there for a long time that you won't come across this. This is a customer's house that I ran across, and this tree, this is a bald cypress, and this tree has been planted for probably 15 years, and I ran across it and saw the straps right here. So always be looking for this situation. It's just easily just to cut the straps. This situation, there's just nothing you can do. All right, some cool things that I've seen, the way people doing an espalier to plants. This is a podocarpus that they tied to the wall and creatively pruned it to where it would stay like this. This is a pyracantha, and a homeowner prunes this probably about every 3 or 4 hours. No, just kidding. Probably every week or so. And he gets up on a ladder and prune this himself. And I was impressed enough to where I took this picture and thought it was really cool. Would I do this in my yard? Absolutely not. I wouldn't have a pyracantha 10 miles from my house. These are climbing hydrangeas. I thought this was really cool. This is Confederate jasmine. This is a smile axe, if you can believe it or not, where a homeowner let it grow up the house over their door, and I ended up taking it off of the wall to clean out the dead. And you can see the dead at the back side of it. And you have to be very conscientious about removing that dead, because if you end up cutting the wrong branch, you can take out a lot of live foliage without realizing it. So make sure you're taking your time and making it look like this when you get done. When I finished pruning it, I got up on a ladder and I put eye bolts in the mortar, put a cable in there, and put zip ties. Zip ties is my best friend when it comes to exfoliating plants or any plants that's being used in this fashion. And you just put it back up and you zip tie it to the wall. It looks really good. And if anybody's been to the Biltmore house, they know that this is on the patio at the left side of it. This is actually these are multiple vines. There's a wisteria, it's a trumpet vine. I can't remember what the other vines are, but I thought that was cool. So remember, when you're pruning someone's house, you want to envision what it's going to look like, so that way when they come home and they see this right here and they say, wow, these guys did such a great job, this is awesome, and I know that this is the best plan for my plants. So when you're finishing up, think about what the customer's going to see when they come home. And that's the end. So this guy's asking, did you learn anything? That's it.
Rick, can you hear me?
I can.
Great, that's a great presentation. I had another question about the large crepe myrtle.
Yes.
I'm sorry, Japanese maple. What time of year did you prune that?
I believe that was in May that I pruned that.
Okay.
Guys, there's a lot of there's a lot of information to pack in 1 hour's worth of PowerPoint here, and I couldn't put everything in here. So if you have any questions, don't be shy to contact Mary Kay. She can get a hold of me, or either you can contact me by calling my office or whatever. I don't mind sharing any information with you guys, obviously. But my goal by doing these PowerPoints is to get everybody else on the same page, to make us all look like a professional, that we are professionals.
I have one more question, Rick.
Mm-hmm.
Is any of this information available in Spanish?
Unfortunately not, because I put this PowerPoint together myself, and pretty much all these pictures are taken by me. So no, sorry.
All right, well, we want to thank you again. Thank you, Rick.
Thank you.